Well, good afternoon. Is it? Yes, it is. Good afternoon, everyone. Dean Prangley, I'm a past president, also the museum chair here. I'm going to give you a bit of an insight about convict Brisbane first, and we'll talk about the naughty ladies of Brisbane town. Okay, so next year, 1825, Brisbane is 200 years old. So it's getting a bit ancient. I'll tell you a bit story of how that got there, but it goes right back to October the 1st, 1823, when John Oxley and the Mermaid came up here. He was ordered by Governor Sir Thomas Brisbane, after, of course, we're named, to explore 3 sites for a penal settlement: Port Curtis, Port Bowen and Moreton Bay. This was to store or to keep under control recidivist prisoners, in other words, second offenders. They'd offended once in England or Ireland, been sent out here and re-offended again. So they were the worst of the worst, according to the establishment at the time. So we had to get started somewhere, and of course the Brisbane River was where things began. Unfortunately, in 1770, Captain Cook did not see the entrance to Moreton Bay, so he said nothing about it. So did Matthew Flinders, for some strange reason. He found Moreton Bay but didn't find the river, kept on going. It was only around 1824 when Oxley was coming back from the Port Curtis area. In the Pumicestone Passage, he saw Thomas Pamphlet and John Finnegan standing on the beach with a bunch of Aboriginal friends who'd looked after them for years. And they waved and waved and waved, and he picked them up, and they showed him the Brisbane River for the first time. It was full of mangroves, only had about 7-foot clearance, but he managed to row up the Brisbane River and made some certain comments about the fact that this could be the site of a penal settlement. Unfortunately, it didn't happen that way, and they selected Redcliffe. Now, Redcliffe this year, of course, commemorates its 200th anniversary, because that was our first penal settlement in the Brisbane area. And I'm going to sell this again. We're having a big bicentennial conference down at Redcliffe. If you've got one of these, have a close look at it, or come and get one from me. It'll be worth your while to listen to the whole history of what happened down there. So Redcliffe began. It wasn't there for very long because the water was bad, the soil wasn't much good, the mosquitoes were driving everyone mad, and to get stores from the ships they had to go knee deep in mud or even further to get to the stores and bring them in. So it only lasted about 7 months. The commandant at the time was Henry Miller, and he'd had enough of Redcliffe, quite frankly. It's a beautiful place now, but at that time it wasn't, as far as he was concerned. In May 1825, he rode up here, and round about somewhere around here, maybe Creek Street, where the creek flowed in, he could see fresh water, got out of his boat, wandered around, came up here, said, this is a high area, I can see ships coming around the corner of Kangaroo Point. This'll do, we'll start something here. So this became a penal settlement, the Moreton Bay Penal Settlement, based on the Brisbane River, named after Sir Thomas, of course. And would you believe, Brisbane City is one of the very few cities in the world actually named after its river. Very, very few of them are around. You could probably think of them. However, Henry began our settlement here in May 1825, along with about 150 convicts. So things started to increase. The more convicts they sent, the more buildings they had to build. Peter Bishop was the next commandant. He didn't do a heck of a lot, but the bloke who did was Patrick Logan. You see his painting over there. Patrick Logan was a real goer. He actually loved stone. He wanted to build stone buildings. They cut the stone from the Kangaroo Point cliffs, brought it over in little tiny lighters, and then they built this building along with many others. All those models you can see there 99% of them are made of this type of stone. It's called Brisbane tuff. And they took 4 months to dig out this site. This site was, of course, a slope going down to the river, so the convicts had to cut out all of that. Good God, the convict has escaped. So anyway, that's the problem they had was lack of proper tools at the time. Everything had to be cut out with picks, shovels and wheelbarrows. It took 4 months to dig this site out. Then they built this magnificent building. Above you can see the original timbers of it. Grey iron bark beams, which have been hand adzed, and the joists, which are pit sawn. They're actually pit sawn. They had pit saws along the river. And it's still original as it was. The reason we put these barrap straps in was to give it extra strength. Okay. In 1826, the stone building started to be made. And at the same time, it was a military outpost. This was actually a military outpost. There was a 50-mile radius around here where no one could come in. If you came in as a free settler or a timber getter or something, accidentally, they could clap you in irons as well. It was a military settlement. And that wasn't lifted until 1842 when it became a free settlement. So we began in May 1825. Over the period between 1825 and 1842, we had about 2,200 male prisoners and only 145 females. And they were all second offenders, the whole lot. Of those, 220 died here and were buried not far from the end of the Walter Taylor Bridge. Okay. Clooney came after Logan. Logan was murdered, by the way. You've got this story here somewhere. They found his body in a shallow grave out near the Wivenhoe Dam area in 1830. Before he was going home, he'd actually been changed, his relief from his duties, done very well, and they were sending him home. Never made it. So we had 1842 free settlement, and that's when Brisbane got its name, and that's when things started to happen. Righto, that's what they looked like. They had the shackles around their legs. They had a cord. They had to pull the chain up so they could walk. In fact, it's known that after a lot of these convicts were released from their shackles, they could not walk properly. They had to shuffle along because they still thought they had their shackles on. Because it was, when you got here, you had 9 months minimum in chains, and if you weren't up to it, you stayed in those chains. Okay. The ladies. That's Moreton Bay Penal Settlement in 1830, by the way. You can see our little building down the front there on the river. This is what the newspapers at the time said about our ladies. Utterly irreclaimable, being the most worthless and abandoned of human beings. Not only loose and profane and filthy in their language, but also receivers of stolen goods, companions of thieves, cutthroats, drunkards into the bargain. They didn't paint a very nice picture of our ladies. Were they that bad? Big question mark. I had a relative, well, I prefer not to say, but she was sent over in the Second Fleet for knocking down some shrubs in a bloke's backyard in Wiltshire. That's the sort of, she got 7 years for doing that. So it just shows you didn't have to do very much to get transported out here. And they were transported out, many, many of them. Of the 13,000 female convicts sent to New South Wales, because this is what we were back then, New South Wales. When did we become Queensland? Hands up. 10th of December, 1859. That's when we became Queensland. Okay. 2/3 of those ladies were English, with some Scots and Welsh, and about a third Irish. Most were aged in their 20s and 30s and were transported for petty crimes. Terms were 3, 5, or 7 years. Little or no transportation for prostitution, strangely enough. Of the 13,000, only 145 women were sent to Moreton Bay between 1824 and 1838. Basically, they were gone in 1838. Male convicts, as I said, totalled about 2,200. Being recidivists, they'd reoffended after arrival in New South Wales. Very few came before 1829, during the period of Captain Logan. Possibly 3 dairy women were noted in the muster of 1828, but in the 1829 muster, 718 male convicts and only 11 female convicts. The muster of 1832, 36 female convicts and 8 children. Wonder. Female factory, of course, had to be set aside from the male factory. Consequently, it was built on the site of the old GPO here in Queen Street. If you look there, that's exactly where it was. The GPO, the post office building in Queen Street. It was demolished in 1872, and that building was built by John Petrie, whose information you saw upstairs. He built a lot of those buildings. So, being approximately 6% of the male population, females were attraction, of course, to military and officials. And Dr. Henry Cowper, who was the surgeon for the settlement, along with Captain Richards of the ship Governor Phillip, Clark William Holden and 2 drunken officers broke into the female factory one evening with a bottle of rum and had a party with the girls. For this, Cowper, who, by the way, was named Cooper's Plains, was Cowper's Plains back then, Cooper's Plains now, was dismissed and sent back to Sydney by the end of 1832 by Clooney, who was the new commandant. A substantial wall was built around the thing to stop this from happening. You can see the model of it where the fan is behind you. Just a sec, I'll just take a drink of water. But to no avail. In 1836, numbers of male prisoners were declining. 78 females remained and represented 19% of the convict population. Captain Foster Fynes, who came from Norfolk Island, they called him Flogger Fynes over there, he gave out plenty of it, was fed up with dalliances and began to send the more rebellious females to Eagle Farm. Now, why Eagle Farm? In 1829, Logan sent 150 convicts to Eagle Farm to create an agricultural settlement. There they hand-tilled about 700 acres of ground to grow potatoes, maize, wheat for the colony, which was getting bigger and bigger and bigger all the time. It was our main food source. Sydney said, don't bother coming to us for food, cook, do your own, which they did very well. In fact, they actually exported wheat and stuff down to Sydney and to Norfolk Island from here. It was very good. So they had to build buildings down there, and for their own, they had all slept down there, and they were guarded down there. So they grew maize, wheat, potatoes, etc. But unfortunately, in 1832, they had a bout of malaria. Hard to believe that Queensland had malaria then, but it did, and it stopped activities. So they left the buildings where they were, and shortly afterwards, the females were gradually sent down to accommodate there. But they needed more buildings. They consequently built slab construction, timber construction, but with brick bases. They built a factory, a store, a school, a hospital, a workhouse, a cookhouse, and a needle room. And they also put a double stockade right round the entire thing, which was sharpened poles, 18 feet high, if you can understand feet these days. 17 feet high and 320 feet long by 311. It was a big stockade. 78 females ended up there at one stage. Now, Fynes, of course, personally guarded the Queen Street female factory at night to stop all this nonsense going on as females were transferred to the Eagle Farm. However, in August 1836, Captain Fines caught the chief constable climbing over the wall using an ingenious ladder. This prompted him to reduce the female numbers to 14 of the oldest. By 1837, all females were stationed at Eagle Farm. This did, however, not stop the nonsense going on. Military would swim Breakfast Creek and meet the women in the long grass. Fines complained that more trouble with military than the prisoners. Punishment for women, if they were caught, included slapped in irons, solitary confinement, and the worst of all was head shavings. The work they were expected to do involved laundry, needlework, corn husking, gardening, and picking oakum. Who knows what picking oakum was? No? I didn't either until I discovered what it was. They had a whole lot of ship's rope given to old ship's rope, which was too dangerous to use anymore. They had to unpick it and tease it out into fibres and then put it in a box or wherever, and it was given to the shipwrights, and they'd mix it with tar and they'd use it to caulk the sides of the ships, of the wooden ships. So that's oakum. Okay, eventually all 57 remaining women were sent back to Sydney on the Sophia Jane in 1839. That was the end of the female situation, and basically the end of Brisbane as a convict colony, because from then on, Andrew Petrie came out here in 1837 as an engineer. He's the bloke who drew these maps. That's his bench over there, his original bench. And he was the first free settlement person with his family that came here in 1837. More came during that period. They started to survey Queen Street, allotments, etc. And eventually in 1842, we became free settlement. After 1842, the only named ex-convict was Hannah Rigby. We know about her. However, the 1846 census shows 30 female ex-convicts living in Brisbane. And in 1851, 107 of them came back here. I don't know why, but they enjoyed the place, obviously. So that's the story of the ladies. Has anyone heard? Well, I'll give you what they ate each day, if you like. Just very, very interesting. This is what they were allowed each day. 680 grams of maize meal, 1.5 pounds. 227 grams of vegetables, about 8 ounces. 170 grams of flour, about 6 ounces. 57 grams of salt pork. 14 grams of salt. And 7 grams of soap. Not a lot of food, but enough to keep you going. So that basically is all I can tell you more about the ladies at this stage. We're still digging up bits and pieces. We actually dug the foundations of the matron's quarters up down there about 10 years ago. We found the foundations, the brick foundation, but all the timber was taken away, obviously, when it became a free settlement. So that's all I have to say at the moment, folks. By the way, upstairs you've got nails, irons, bricks, Lost Brisbane books, other books, beautiful books, and the membership, if you want to become a member. And if you want to give us a few dollars on the way out, there's a big donation box there. We need your assistance. So next year, 200 years at Redcliffe, and we've got 200 years in Brisbane the year after, so keep an eye on it. Come to our conferences. Thank you very much.